Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. This is our second webinar of our suicide prevention and intervention for Asian American and Asian immigrant youth webinar series. And it's webinar 2, clinical and community-based approaches. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our moderator for this webinar. Keye Xu is a research associate for the Lotus project, and she is dedicated to bridging evidence-based programs and psychological research with culturally relevant mental health practices to better support children and families in AAPI and immigrant communities. She got her PhD degree in education with a human development and psychology focus from the University of California, Los Angeles. And her dissertation explored the cultural nuances of parenting among Chinese American mothers. So with that being said, I'll pass the virtual mic over to Koya to introduce our speakers for today.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I will start by introducing our amazing speaker today. So our first speaker is Mary Lu, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist. Mary is currently a program director of Project Hope at Orange County Asian and Pacific Islander Community Alliance. And she graduated with her bachelor's from UCLA and her master's from Hope International University, and has experience working with individuals, couples, and families of all backgrounds at a full-service wraparound faith-based institutions and private practices. And our second speaker of today is Peter Ji, who is the co-executive director of Little Tokyo Service Center in Los Angeles. Peter oversees social services, mental health, homeless services, and community programs serving communities across LA County. Peter previously served in roles at Asian Americans for Equality, University Settlement, and The Door in New York City. As a registered nurse, Peter is committed to advancing culturally responsive mental health care and strengthening community-based systems of support. With that, I'd like to hand the virtual mic to Peter to get us started.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And we are excited to be here. And, there's just so much collective experience in the room. So we really are excited to be in a room with you all. And we are also just very thankful for the work that you're doing. My colleague Mary is going to do AV while I kind of just quickly set us up, and I'll hand the mic over to her. But we will just kind of go through really briefly our objectives that you all saw in the email and in the circulated materials. And then in this next slide, I just wanted to acknowledge in this next slide that introduces Camellia Louie, that Little Tokyo Service Center and OCAPICA are excited to be part of the statewide California Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Health Equity Coalition. And so today really builds on an earlier Lotus project session that includes research from Camellia Louie at the Alcohol Research Group, which highlights rising suicidal ideation among A and HPI youth in California. If you kind of use those two QR codes, you can kind of get links to the different work and the previous webinar. And don't worry, all of these PowerPoints are going to be sent to you, so you don't have to really rush to kind of scan things right now. In this next slide, we wanted to just introduce a framing around public health around the conversation today. The CDC defines prevention as efforts that reduce risk factors and strengthen protective factors across individuals, families, and communities before a crisis occurs. And in suicide prevention, this means reducing the risk factors such as stigma, isolation, and untreated mental health conditions. It also means strengthening protective factors such as connection, belonging, and access to care, and also creating environments where people feel safe seeking help early. And in this next slide, it kind of builds on something from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And we're going to switch to this next slide, and I'm going to briefly kind of go over the different levels of prevention. There's universal prevention, so that's something for entire populations. Selective prevention, which is for groups at elevated risk. And indicated prevention for individuals already experiencing suicidal thoughts and behaviors. And when Mary and I were talking about today, we were trying to figure out a way to kind of tap on all of these. So we're excited to be here. And in this next slide, It just kind of like highlights that together, we really are hoping that clinicians and community members at the end of this webinar can create and identify multiple pathways to support AAAI youth and young adults and their families. I'm going to be focusing a little bit on the community members and advocates, and I'm hoping that at the end of this webinar, you'll have a better understanding of how stigma prevents young people from seeking help, how we can create community spaces where they feel seen and valued, and what practical actions we can take as advocates to make it easier for youth to reach out for support. And with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to my wonderful colleague, Mary from OCAPICA.
Thanks, Peter. Hi, everyone. So just briefly for part one, you'll be able to reflect on Asian cultural factors, family dynamics, stigma, and immigration experiences, and how that might shape help-seeking behaviors. You'll consider how culturally responsive approaches can improve assessment, engagement, and treatment with AAAI, or Asian American, Asian Immigrant Children and Youth. Finally, you will learn how to improve engagement with caregivers, school-based systems, and others to increase support for AAAI youth. Oh, that's going to be my downfall, is trying to say that acronym over and over. So we wanted to get to know who we're talking to first. So we have got quite a few people here. So let's do a temperature check across the Zoom room and see how comfortable we are even with the topic of suicide. If we could get the Zoom poll up, please answer these questions. How comfortable are you talking about the topic of suicide? Not at all, a little, somewhat, comfortable, very comfortable. Have you worked with someone who has expressed suicidal ideation, which means thoughts of suicide, or have been impacted by suicide? Yes or no? And last but not least, have you known someone who has either died by suicide or made attempts? Go ahead and fill that poll out. And once it is complete, we'll go ahead and share out what the results are. We'll give it maybe one more minute just to fill out those poll questions. Okay, hopefully everybody has filled out who is able to right now. Could we go ahead and close the poll and see the results? All right, so we are seeing that we have quite a bit of people comfortable with this topic, which is wonderful. So hopefully there is something you can still gain from our presentation today. And welcome for those who are honest of saying they don't know about it as much or just a little. So yeah, we hope that there's more we can share with you. And we've got quite a bit of people who have worked with someone who's expressed SI. So welcome. And just a few who haven't. So hopefully this will set the tone for when you do encounter someone who has expressed suicidal ideation. And last but not least, this one's more of a sad statistic. It does look like 86% of us know someone who's died by suicide or made attempts. So this topic is highly important, and thank you all for being here. And thank you for answering that poll honestly. So before we start, I do want to clarify that the intended audience for my part of the presentation is for providers. That means those who are currently or anticipate working with the Asian American and Asian immigrant population within the behavioral health or health field. The things I shared today may not resonate with you necessarily or your clients because everyone has such a distinct and unique cultural background, even within the Asian population. So although Peter and I will be speaking from our limited personal and professional experiences, we do hope that you can gain more perspective and tools to working with the AAAI population. I wanted to remind you that the conversation we're having today isn't about right or wrong. It's more about opening our minds to the possibility of different options or different ways of viewing suicide within our population. And we hope that by the end of this webinar, you can expand your mind to consider cultural context for Asian Americans and Asian immigrants in your work. Also, this needs to be said because we're going to be speaking on really heavy topics today about suicide and death. Please care for yourselves as you need and connect with a professional if you do need additional care. We'll have more resources at the end of our presentation today, but Peter and I are more than open to connecting with you and are reachable in case you do need someone to talk to and you don't know where to start. We're both well-resourced in our community. So thank you all for being here. This is just a brief overview of my portion of the presentation. I'll be introducing OCAPICA, which is my program that I'm a part of, and also going over understanding suicide in context, reviewing the different levels of suicidality, ways to engage with the AAAI clients, and discussing ways to increase support for this population. So I'm going to just really quickly go over these slides. These will be part of the slides we send out. And so if you do need more information, please take some time to take a look or visit our website. But OCAPICA, standing for Orange County Asian and Pacific Islander Community Alliance, is a large nonprofit agency in Orange County that serves underserved and linguistically isolated community members with their health and wellness needs, from housing support, behavioral health services, all the way to advocacy and research. I saw Marianne Fu, our executive director, pop in on the chat, but she's wonderful. And she and several other community leaders actually founded OCAPICA in 1997 to serve Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities and immigrants in these areas. And since then, we have grown large to be able to serve all communities that are underserved. But for the sake of time, once again, I'll leave this information from our services here in these slides for your reference, and please visit our website for more information. I'm part of Project Hope. I'm the program director, and so it would be remiss for me not to spotlight our program a little bit here. We are one of the behavioral health programs that operate under OCAPICA, servicing clients up to 25 years old for mild to moderate behavioral health challenges with case management, crisis support, and short-term therapy sessions. Additionally, we do have the privilege to support those who've been impacted by hate and harm through discrimination or hate crimes by providing free short-term therapeutic services to all ages. So we're very proud to say that in this last year, Project Hope, based on our discharge data, 96% of our clients felt their mental health had improved after receiving services from us. 92% felt they knew who to reach out to if they needed help in the future, and 90% were open to receiving mental health services in the future if needed. So this is a big deal just because we know stigmatization in the AAI community is very high. So the fact that they're open to receiving services and know who to reach out to is a big win for us. All right, so these are more of our programs and departments. Please take a look. They're wonderful and have so many services for everybody. And this is our fundraiser that we have once a year. All right, so just a little bit more about my personal background. I am a Korean American female and have been living in SoCal my whole life. I'm the daughter of immigrants, and I've been working with OCAPICA for nearly 7 years now. And through my cultural context, Korean American, female, born in America, daughter of immigrants, and more, I understand that this shapes my worldview, the same way that my parents' context shapes their worldview. And so what does this have to do with suicide perceptions? So the one big point I want to make here is that our understanding and perception of suicide are often influenced by cultural factors. As we work with others of many backgrounds, particularly in the AAI community, it's important to understand cultural context that may shape their views of suicide. Some considerations I want to talk about today are collectivism versus individualism, taboo versus everyday language, and then internal locus of control versus external locus of control. So Asian cultures traditionally prioritize collectivism, emphasizing national unity and social harmony over personal gain. Family holds special importance. Even non-relatives may be called brother, sister, auntie, grandmother, reflecting those deep familial bonds even within the culture. and families do protect their shared values from outside influences. And at Project Hope, we often see generational conflicts when the parents' collective mindset clashes with more of our children's individualistic views from an Americanized standpoint. So, due to those values like hierarchy and filial piety, which I've defined here, Asian individuals often prioritize others' needs and respect for others or elders over personal desires, which is very unlike, in some ways, American culture, which encourages more of that individual expression. So the act of the individual from a collectivism mindset can impact the perception of the entire family or the entire culture, perhaps, by others. And I did want to talk a little bit more about face as well. So face refers to a person's respect, honor, and social standing. In many Asian cultures, people navigate both an outside face that they show to others and an inside face that reflects their true feelings. And those two things can conflict, creating a tension around whether to reveal your own inner experience. So while this framework can strengthen community and belonging, definitely face is something that is very traditional and allows us to build such strong communities. But it also contributes to this generational disconnect that we've seen in our work with children. Children are hesitant to share their suicidal thoughts with their parents, not because they don't want to, but because of the need to save face. This may show up with thoughts like, I don't want to be a burden on my family, a fear of being invalidated by their loved ones, or even a fear of letting their family down with their mental health struggles. And among AAI youth, this pressure often leads to masking their distress and struggling to ask for help. So clinically, we often use perspective-taking exercises to help youth understand their parents' cultural backgrounds here and hopefully reduce that feeling of isolation between the parents and the children. And then at the same time, we also encourage our parents and caregivers to engage in their own perspective taking so that both sides can better understand each other. Easier said than done, of course. Many AAI communities still stigmatize mental health, and especially the topic of suicide. Talking about wanting to die or even acknowledging a family member's death by suicide can be taboo. On the flip side, more casual comments like, oh, life is so hard, I wish I were dead, or kill me now, right, make it hard to tell when someone is struggling with actual suicidal thoughts or whether it's just part of the languaging that they're using from their culture. So providers often need to explore how culture may shape a client's understanding of suicide, including family beliefs and expectations. We can ask our clients, what did your parents think of suicide? What do they think? And how does your culture frame your knowledge about it? I had a client who shared that when she told her mother about her suicidal thoughts, her mother responded by saying she would kill herself first. An unhealthy reaction, but one rooted in such fear and cultural context. In many Asian collectivist cultures, a child's struggles reflect on the family. So the parents may respond in turn with hurt or defensiveness, almost an offensiveness, right? How could you, after everything I've done? And when you really think about it in the context of Asian culture, this is a natural reaction. It's also more acceptable in many AAI families to discuss physical symptoms over more psychological symptoms. So saying things like, I'm tired, my stomach hurts, often replaces, I feel depressed or I'm anxious. So rather than challenging this tendency, providers can use physical complaints as clues to underlying mental health concerns and help caregivers understand how emotional distress often shows up in both theirs and their children's bodies. Excuse me. youth may be more prone to suicidal thoughts when they have an external locus of control, meaning that they feel they do not have as much control over their situation. Suicide may be an escape from the pressures and stressors in their life. Those who have more of an internal locus of control illustrate those who are more independent and feel they have the ability to change their situation. So let's just take a moment to think about our own views of suicide based on our context. Here are some examples I've seen in the conversation of suicide. Take some time to read through them. And I'll be the first to say that in my cultural context, it taught me that suicide is a sin and a shameful thing. I was then able to widen my scope of understanding through more conversations about suicide and clinical trainings that educated me, much like this one, right? Practice understanding someone else who may have these viewpoints without judgment. If it helps, think about a parent of a client you may have and the context with which they may view suicide. It's important to note here that some cultures may view suicide as more acceptable. Consider a father who has a lot of debt and maybe they've lost their job, and then in an honorable attempt to keep his debt from passing on to his family, he then decides that killing himself may be the better option, right? So there's a lot of different views of suicide here. And for the sake of time, I'll move forward. So by understanding our own views of suicide and their context, we can better understand and help our clients with their suicidal ideation. If we act out of fear, it can actually cause us to either overreact or underreact toward our client's expression of SI. So at Project Hope, we train practicum students who are entering the field for the first time. And I see that familiar gaze in their eyes when they encounter their first suicidal client. There's something about suicide that is just deeply personal, feels so heavy to hold, and instills this feeling that we will never be the expert of this topic because it's always changing and there's always so much more to learn. So let's just be really honest in this space to understand that these things may shape our view of suicide. And as we're working with clients who have suicidal ideation, these things may limit us in terms of how to work with them. And there are 2 points here that I definitely want to touch on. Avoidance. So it's so easy to avoid the topic of suicide with AAAI clients who are already dealing with their own reasons for avoiding the topic, right? So all we need to do is pretend it doesn't exist for them to gloss over the suicidal thought. So please catch yourselves when you're doing this. I remember in my very beginning of my therapy journey, that feeling of dread behind asking the question, do you feel like you want to kill yourself? And then experiencing that relief when they said no, right? That experience is so human, but that could also have prevented me from having that conversation with them and pursuing more of an in-depth assessment. And so that might be that avoidance I'm talking about. Something that can also be at work here is that cultural experience of not wanting to make others uncomfortable or prying into their personal lives. There's just this feeling of, oh, they don't want to share with me. I don't want to ask. But I want us to engage a little bit further with clients so that we can cultivate a space where clients can be honest with those suicidal thoughts, because we might be the very first place that cares to know about them. And when we talk about suicide in clinical settings, one of the biggest challenges I need to mention is the fear of liability. That fear can unintentionally narrow our focus and lead us to overlook the full spectrum of suicidal behavior. Suicidality is not just a single point on a line. It ranges from passive thoughts to active planning and everything in between. So within the AI community, fear of judgment and us jumping to hospitalization and medication management can deter someone from sharing about their suicidal thoughts to their clinician. Sometimes hospitalization is the only way to keep someone safe. So I don't want us to overlook that. However, it is important to remember that the experience can be traumatic for some. So it should not be our go-to response to someone sharing about their SI. That's why clinical discernment is so essential. All of your roles are so important, and thank you for being here to hear about this. We need to understand where a client truly is on that spectrum and then match our response to their level of risk, their context, and their needs. It's not about reacting in more of that all or nothing way. It's more responding with nuance, curiosity, and clinical judgment. And so this goes straight into an overview, very generally, of the levels of suicide based on the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. I've also included a link at the bottom for the form translated into different languages for use with clients who are monolingual. I found that this is a little more helpful for me to discern whether someone is more of a higher risk and should be assessed further versus at a lower risk. But please use clinical discernment and consultation to help in determining these risk levels. And also, there are some risk factors to review. So the obvious one that most of you probably know, if there's a previous history of suicidal attempts, that increases the risk significantly. So just keep that in mind, that at a higher risk, there should be a higher level of support and need. If there is some chronic suicidality, that also increases the risk. Substance misuse, any mental health condition such as depression and anxiety, etc. There are more severe mental health conditions as well to consider. A high impulsivity, so this could be someone who they are not suicidal and then suddenly they're suicidal and they have a high impulsivity that could lead them to maybe reacting more severely and following through with the suicide plan than someone who does not have a high impulsivity. Hopelessness is an obvious one. A family history of suicide, a death of a loved one in any capacity, a sudden life change, job change, anything leading to a hopelessness for the future. Access to lethal means, and that kind of ties with that high impulsivity. Just because you have an access point, it actually leads more to a higher risk. And then the last two are just if there is any mental health concerns, even within the family, like the parent has a mental health condition, that can actually impact the child. And the last one is school pressures. This is one I wanted to emphasize in our presentation today, that those who are high achieving, they may look fine from the outside. However, that is also a risk factor to consider. Excuse me. So I'm sure that's not all of them. So at this time, I will ask, what are some other risk factors that you've seen in your work or that you can think of that would impact the AAI community? So let's share out in the chat. But for the sake of time, I will be moving on to protective factors, but go ahead and do that. Here are some protective factors on the flip side. Connection to the community and the support system, feeling supported, right, by your partner, your friends, your family, or even connected to your culture, having a strong sense of cultural identity. I matter to someone. Someone would miss me if I was gone, right? That could be a reason for living, a feeling of hope. Access and availability to consistent and high quality physical and behavioral health care. A lot of the times, this is something that we don't have. And so that is a protective factor. They can access help more readily. Reduced access to lethal means of suicide for those at risk. And so that ties back to the risk factor, right? Is if you have more access, that's a risk. If you don't have as much access, you can't follow through with your plans of suicide as much. And then last but not least, more of a, for better or for worse, cultural, religious, and moral objections to suicide. So the fact that you think suicide is a sin could prevent you from going through with a suicide plan. And that can be a protective factor in that way. And likewise, thank you all for sharing so much. What are some other protective factors that impact the AAI community? Go ahead and type those into the chat as well to share out with others. All right, so I'm going to be moving on to engagement with the AAAI clients. So based on OCAPICA Project Hope clients, these are some of the trends we have been seeing in our work. More behavioral related symptoms, acting out, and the reason for this, we believe, is because they aren't able to express through their words, or they aren't being taken seriously with their words, and so it is more of a behavioral symptom that we see. A lack of focus, tantruming, right? Withdrawing. We've also seen an expression of SI in much younger clients. And this is also a sad one, but something that we need to recognize is they get younger. They're expressing suicidality as young as 8 years old, and even younger than that. And so we are maybe seeing that social media plays a role in this. Other peers that are suicidal, older siblings, parents that are expressing suicidality in the home, and they're learning from that way of expressing themselves. There's a reluctance to talk about issues. So something we've been seeing more consistently are children where one parent lives here in America with a child and another parent is living in Asia to provide, to work, and sending money over here. So typically we have seen the dad living out in Asia and then sending money to the mom who lives over here and is having difficulty managing the parenting by themselves. There's no father figure in the home. And so the typical thing we are noticing is that young boys who don't have that father figure are having more behavioral issues in school. They're having a difficulty acculturating. They're showing attention-seeking behaviors. And then if it's caught at the younger ages, they're coming into services, we're able to address it, help the family get them connected. But if it continues, we have also seen older, I'll get to it soon, for youth, engage in substance use, as a coping strategy, not wanting to talk with their peers, not wanting to talk with their parents as much about just this, lack of connection they're feeling within their own families. And then we've also seen relational difficulties with peers. This is likely connected to pandemic and difficulty building social skills. And they just have issue building social support for themselves. And they are heavily impacted by external factors. So children are heavily dependent on their circumstances. It's typical to see that the parents are separated, family discord, death in the family, that the child is directly impacted by that, and they show mental health concerns. So as you get a little older with AAAI youth clients, we're noticing high achieving. They're just so focused on, building up to a future for themselves, getting into that dream college, but their mental health takes a back burner, right? Is pushed to the side. There's more of a passive suicidality. Well, if I didn't wake up tomorrow, that would be fine with me. More of that core belief of I'm not good enough, more perfectionism tendencies. I'd rather do it perfectly, and if I can't do that, I'd rather just give up everything, do nothing at all. And at this age, we're starting to see an internalization of external pressures more. So as you saw with the children, they acted out immediately when something got hard. But here, those pressures then become internalized. And soon it's not, oh, my parent is pressuring it. It's, I am pressuring me. I need to get this done. And even though it seems like it's from them, it might be from their generation, from their culture. So that's something to take note of and work with. Same thing, relational conflict with peers and caregivers here. We have seen this overwhelm and kind of a giving up of wanting to connect with their parents at all, just because there's been years of trying and not connecting. And then anxiety and depression, as well as praise as pressure. So this one's really interesting. We've seen parents praising, is a good thing. However, it's actually leading some youth to internalize that pressure and want to continue to achieve and have that high standard of achievement throughout their life. So we are suggesting here praise, yes, but also acceptance as well. Being able to accept your child as is versus just what they can accomplish and do. So different ways to engage with the AAAI clients. When we're working with the clients who experience suicidal thoughts, there are 4 core areas I want to touch on today. First and foremost, everything begins with trust. Youth clients and caregivers, especially those in communities where mental health carries a stigma in the AAAI culture, they need to feel that the therapeutic space is safe, non-judgmental, and culturally attuned. And without that foundation, they are less likely to disclose suicidal ideation, and they may not come back ever, right? So it's almost like that one opportunity, they're like, let's try therapy. They receive something that pushes them away. They're like, therapy doesn't work for me. And they kind of make this decision in that one moment. So I do implore you to take time to establish trust. Providers can practice slowing down the process, allow for silences in the room, and take the time to build the trust and show a genuine interest in their experiences. And additionally, understand that youth, they often prefer you not to be the expert in the room, right? They want somebody that can walk alongside them versus in other avenues, they have their teacher, their parents, other authority figures who are there telling them what to do. As clinicians, we have the privilege to build safety and come alongside our clients. Second, we use clinical discernment to determine whether hospitalization or medication might be appropriate. I remember hearing from one of my clinicians who was working with a Chinese family that she had called a school counselor who let her know that she reported mom to CPS for neglect due to the parent refusing medication for her child. While we can't jump to conclusions about that specific situation and the decision-making process, I want to remind you all to exercise some caution in labeling these actions of distrust for medication and distrust for hospitalization as abusive in nature. I think that's more extreme. I would rather us have more conversation around medication as a choice, as well as for hospitalization. It can feel protective for some, and for others, it might be a shameful point or threatening of the family's dynamic and, process, their face, so to speak. So yeah, really exercising caution there, as well as parents, they might view the system as more punitive from these actions and receive further stigma from accessing services for themselves or their children. Third, we consider whether involving family members into treatment will help or harm. In some Asian American families, mental health struggles are minimized to preserve harmony or avoid shame. So in others, family can be such a powerful support. And our job is to assess whether that involvement will actually contribute to that safety and healing. We have encountered moments where the mom is the source of a lot of that suicidal trigger, right? And so it's figuring out how do we want to engage with the family? How do we want to engage with the client? And not forcing them to work with family, but understanding that family can be a strength. And then finally, cultural context, being able to shape how we screen and safety plan. Clients may express distress through physical symptoms, as I've said. They might avoid that direct languaging around suicide, or they might have that cultural context of fear of disappointing their parents, fear of not being good enough. And so effective safety planning does mean creating more strategies to fit their cultural and family reality. Oh man, time is flying by. So in here, I wanted to touch on ways to engage caregivers. So you can see we're doing children, youth, caregivers. We're hitting all levels of the community here. In language services is crucial. If you want access to the family, you need to speak their language, or you need to have a way to have someone speak their language. That means translation services, having in-language material, surveys. And so I just want to leave that there for you to consider. If you don't have it, obviously, the next best thing would be to still do all the things we talked about here. But if you can access in language, that would be the first step to the rest of this. Involving the parent and the caregiver into treatment to foster connection. Too often I've seen parents dropping off their kid and saying, just fix them, I'll be back. It's encouraging them to be part of the process, letting them know that they are part of the solution. And that allows them to feel like they have a say and an ability to change the situation. Respect given as an open door to working with the family. So for us, because of the cultural context, we just come into the family knowing that they are the expert of their family and we are coming in alongside. We never say, this is how you should parent your child. This is what you need to do. We're always providing space to have a conversation because we give respect in order to gain respect from this population. Also, we assume that our parent and caregiver cares about our child's well-being. Of course, there may be situations like abuse that stop us from thinking that, but I always want us to come in at first to assume that truth about the family so that we can engage them in the process. Eastern view of healing versus a Western view. So this is just, once again, that generational difference of having that more holistic view, connecting the mind, body, and spirit versus a Western view of seeing those two things as separate. You heal the body separately, you heal the mind separately. That's not really the case in an Eastern view of healing. So you would address the somatic symptoms in order to address the mental health symptoms as well. Using language that destigmatizes mental health. I wanted to make a mention here about respecting diverse parenting styles. Eastern styles of parenting do tend to be more authoritarian. However, we don't want to pathologize that. Here in America, it is more authoritative, but I would say trying to find a blend between the two. Instead of saying, that's wrong, this is right, being able to have a conversation of how can we help your child feel more heard? How can we engage you to have a conversation instead of you telling your child what to do? And that would be that balance. And just as a reminder, not to pathologize culture. It's not that the culture is wrong. It's that these are ways we can come alongside culture and better help our clients. Okay, and then balancing between advising and suggesting and having a parent partner, someone else outside of you as a clinician to support the parent directly, and then making referrals to peer support as well as support groups. Okay, very briefly, here's something amazing. I'll have more of a info on the next slide, but the cultural assessment of risk for suicide actually uses different languaging. So this might be good for you to use with your clients of AAI communities. Instead of saying, do you feel like you want to kill yourself? Using some of this languaging to see if you can pull out those suicidal thoughts that they were hiding, right? Have you felt your loved one would be better off without you? I know clients or parents who would say no to the first, but yes to the second, right? So here's a different way to language that material. And here is a resource for you. Here's the link, and it's a free manual for you to use some of that languaging to do some screening. Here are some additional points that I noticed working with the AI population. Often finding that minimization comes up with both caregivers and youth. This might show up as the parent reassuring me that the only thing going on with their child is that they're doing badly in school. And then once that's fixed, everything will be fine, right? It could also show up as someone sharing about their trauma, and it's really terrible, but they close out that story of abuse with, it's not that bad, could be worse, right? Or someone sharing about their suicidal ideation, but downplaying the severity level in order to not get hospitalized. So these are all examples of minimization just to keep in mind culturally that it makes sense based on culture, but we are trying to catch that a little better. Catastrophizing as well. Client may suddenly be doing fine, but deteriorate in functioning because of one criticism that unraveled their confidence and their progress. So especially in our youth that are high achieving, there's a chance that suicidal thoughts may occur where an opportunity doesn't pan out, they don't get into their dream college, they're rejected by every job interview. So if you notice them catastrophizing, you may be able to further catch and assess suicidal thoughts lingering under the surface. And then last but not least, perfectionism. This was kind of tied with catastrophizing, but I feel like we all know someone who is a perfectionist, myself included, right? And maybe it's you. But I want to show that sometimes it promotes high excellence and can be a great motivator, but it does have an effect on our AI youth. There's that fear to even make even the smallest mistake, that it damages their self-confidence, and then paired hand in hand can increase anxiety, depressive symptoms, suicidality. So please watch out for these as you're working with your clients and further assess and observe. Even if by themselves they're not an indicator of suicide thoughts, they could very much lead to them. Oh man. Okay, so what can parents do? I think I'm going to leave this one. The 2 points here I want to say is helping parents believe their children and also helping them with their urge to share about their own suffering, pain, and suicidal thoughts in that moment. There is a time and place for them to share those. However, when your child is sharing about your suicidal thoughts, that's not the time to go into the spiel about, I've sacrificed all these things for you, blah, 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 right? Very important, but not at that moment. So those are kind of the 2 things I want to say there. And then we'll just move forward to increasing support. So safety planning, very crucial. There's also different alternatives that you can check in with your clients: eating, sleeping, basic needs, alternative treatments like Eastern medicine, chiropractors, acupuncture, Tai Chi, cupping, etc. that might resolve some of their symptoms. There's also the spectrum of care: primary care, IOP, partial hospitalization, hospitalization that's voluntary, involuntary medication management, and then being able to connect on more points, adding connection points there, aiming for consistency, being able to involve suicidal assessment in every single session if possible, just so it becomes something not so rare, but that you're constantly having the conversation and normalizing it. And then resourcing and cultural strengths. Sorry, I definitely need to go into these more, but don't have time. And then always the recommendation is to go from least to most intensive support. You don't want to jump straight to hospitalization or involuntary, right? You want to add in all those different levels with different needs. Here's a safety planning component that you can reference. I'm gonna move on, and I don't think I'll have time for these case studies, unfortunately. So maybe if we'll have time, we could come back, but I wanna make sure Peter has time to talk. And just so you can help make this stick, there's so much information I shared. Please teach a peer something you learned today. That'll help you understand it better and notice, oh, I have a gap in my thinking, and then you can reference these slides again. And then please apply 2 of the things you brought in that we learned today in your work with the AI community. And without further ado, I will pass it off to Peter. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Mary. I think we're going to just do a quick temperature check. And so our colleagues at the Lotus Project are going to do a Zoom poll. And we're asking you to answer the question: I believe the AAAI community is equipped to talk openly about suicide. Just really to celebrate my colleague Mary, who gave so many incredible clinical pearls, and so really grateful for Mary for being able to contribute this. So we'll wait just a quick minute to let you answer this question before we kind of jump in. I think we could probably close the poll. and see the results. So there's more people that feel that the community is not equipped to talk openly about suicide. So this is like actually helpful for us, for Mary and I to see as we jump into this next part of the section. So on the next slide, I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that naming that suicide prevention is really complex. And there really is no single solution and no one program or intervention that can address suicide on its own. And this slide that really kind of connects like what Mary was talking about with what I have to share. So I thought it would be helpful to organize a few themes of contributions to suicide risk among AAAI youth and young adults based on the research. We know that mental health stigma and low help-seeking behaviors are a reality in the communities that we work in. We also know that there's a lot of untreated or delayed treatment for those living with serious mental illness. On this next slide, you'll kind of see some of the themes that Mary brought up around family and intergenerational pressures, as well as some of the comments that we saw in the chat around racism and discrimination. And Camelia Louie in the first webinar spoke a little bit about the hidden disparities within NHPI communities when you disaggregate the data. This next slide kind of defines what mental health stigma is. So mental health stigma refers to negative beliefs, attitudes, and or stereotypes about people experience mental health challenges or suicidal thoughts. And we know that this can kind of have multiple levels. On this next slide, we really want to kind of focus that reducing stigma really is a key step in suicide prevention because it makes it easier for people to seek support early. And in this next two slides, it really kind of just lifts up and reconnects everything all together around stigma and cultural context. And we know when working in the AAAI community that there's low help-seeking behaviors. We know that there's a lot of unmet needs. Among NHPI adults experiencing mental illness, 70% don't receive treatment. Mary spoke a lot about the cultural stigma and shame. And in this next slide, we still see a lot of the model minority myth and also the reality that suicide is the leading cause of death for AAI youth and young adults. So in this next slide, I'm just really excited to share about some of the work that we're doing here in Los Angeles County at Little Tokyo Service Center, or LTSC. We recently celebrated our 45th anniversary, and we were founded because there wasn't a one-stop shop for the Japanese-speaking community, and community leaders came together to change that. In this next slide, you'll kind of see that as we've grown, we are now over 100 strong, serving more than 10,000 community members across LA County from all walks of life. And in addition to the direct services we offer, we are also an affordable housing developer, and we're on track to build nearly 2,000 units of permanent affordable housing by the end of 2026 in the city of LA. And as a human service provider and a community development organization, we really learned that meaningful change can happen in both people and in places. I really want to credit some of the youth and young adults prior to 2018 in our community that came together to talk about what they were seeing among their peers and in the community. And they took action by organizing a conference called the Changing Tides Conference in May of 2018. It was an open conversation on compassion and well-being. And from this conference, they created a leadership body that continued to lead workshops and do advocacy. And I really want to lift up my predecessor, Margaret Shimada, for listening to these youth voices and helping to mobilize the broader community across LA County. Really recognizing that there are very few AANHPI youth and young adults that were accessing county mental health services. And I really want to acknowledge some of my colleagues who lead our Changing Tides work, including Ayumi, Matthew, Lynn, Dina, and Marilyn. And the next slide kind of shows that LTSC now serves over 5,000 youth and young adults across LA County. And in this next slide, you'll kind of see that it's broken into prevention, early intervention, crisis support, and postvention and healing. And in the next slide, we're kind of focusing on prevention and early intervention. And I don't want us to forget about the important crisis response supports that there are in the community. There's 988 now. And this slide kind of covers the distinction between 988 and 911. And I know that there's a lot of folks from across the country on this call, but I just kind of copied the California Youth Crisis Line, which is another resource that we have here in the state of California. And as we kind of go into what's next, I was trying to think about how to connect all of the work together. And I coincidentally listened to an episode of Hidden Brain on invisibility that featured the work of psychologist Professor Flatt, where he studied the concept of mattering. And I thought this was a really powerful way to unify some of the programs here at LTSC. In this next slide, it kind of defines mattering as you are important to other people. You're noticed. You'll be missed if you were gone. Others depend on you in meaningful ways. And when you look at some of the national surveys, 40 to 50% of youth and young adults don't feel like they matter. And for subpopulations like the LGBTQ community, the AAAI community, this percentage increases. And so I'm going to ask us to maybe just slip through the next 2 slides to this last slide. And you'll kind of see this when we send it out. But, there's some takeaways I'm hoping we can walk away with. For clinicians out there, there are validated tools to assess mattering that I encourage you to explore. But I find the concept helpful because it really clarifies something both for clinicians and non-clinicians. Our role as adults in the community, whether we're parents, chosen family, teachers, coaches, faith leaders, neighbors, is to help young people know that there's at least one person in their life who truly sees them. Research shows that a strong sense of mattering can act as a protective factor, helping young people feel connected, valued, and more willing to reach out to support when they are struggling. And the programs I'm going to share about today are important, and many of them can be replicated in other settings. But what can't be replicated as easily is the underlying principle that must guide all of our work, building communities where everyone feels like they matter. Importantly, helping someone feel like they matter is not necessarily resource constrained. It doesn't require a clinical license or a formal program. It can begin with everyday acts of noticing, listening, and showing up for young people in our lives. And when connection and community matter deeply, they are not a substitute for care, especially for youth experiencing serious mental illness, where early identification and access to clinical supports are critical. So while we are kind of focusing a little bit on protective factors like mattering, we also have to be clear that youth living with serious mental illness really need access to timely, culturally responsive clinical care. And that's a little bit of what Mary talked about earlier. This all leads to this other idea in the next few slides around positive youth development and how this approach is also well-researched and also can help inform how youth and young adults can reach their full potential. And it was always taught at its core that positive youth development is about young people having positive role models in their lives. I'm going to just jump to this next slide around our program in partnership with Question, Persuade, and Refer, slide 75. So if stigma is really the barrier and mattering is a protective factor, then the question becomes, what does this look like in practice? Question, Persuade, and Refer is a brief evidence-informed gatekeeper training that teaches people to recognize suicide risk signs and how to intervene. And with private support, LTSC is able to provide these free to the public, in person or virtual, though in my opinion, in person is always better. Our trainers understand the AAAI experience, and they can offer a 1 or 2 hour training. And in calendar year 2025, over 500 community members went through QPR. And this is a great baseline for training people so that they could really organize it at their workplaces, in their houses of worship, in their schools, for their student groups. But I really want to lift up some of the survey findings from our QPR participants that most feel like they leave with a better understanding of suicide prevention. There's a significant improvement in being able to recognize early warning signs. And there was a 7 times increase in knowledge for those, and also to have confidence in the ability to ask someone about their suicidality and appropriately intervene. And so this really is an incredible opportunity for community members just to become a little bit more comfortable with this topic. In this next slide, it talks a little bit about our Changing Tide Stream program, which is our free therapy stipend open to all youth and young adults in California ages 16 to 35. And we have over 80 private practice therapists in our directory, with most having experience in the Asian American, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander communities. Around 400 youth and young adults have reached out to us since our therapy stipend got started. In this next slide, you'll kind of see that what's really great about a program like this, it helps to build trust in mental health care. Our stipend allows for a reduction in financial barriers to first-time care, and it also addresses symptoms before they escalate. In this next slide, you'll kind of see some key takeaways. For many of the participants of our therapy stipend program, this is their first experience with therapy. And for most, cost has been a major barrier to accessing care. Most folks heard about our program through friends, which really highlights the power of peer-to-peer education. And most importantly, 75% have a really high satisfaction at the end of their therapy stipend program. And there's been improvements in self-reported mental health. And we have really high completion rates for all 10 sessions that exceed national benchmarks. In the next few slides, I just am going to take a brief moment just to celebrate here in the state of California, there was a one-time investment through the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative. And I really want to lift up some of the systemic work that we're doing in the California NHPI Health Equity Coalition. There's several statewide campaigns that are happening for youth and young adults. In this slide, you'll kind of see the Take Space to Pause campaign. And in this next slide, you'll kind of see the statewide Never a Bother campaign. And really, the state of California has done a great job of really building the campaign and having it be designed by youth and young adults. In this next slide, you'll also see one of the great things that the state also did was they realized that in order to reach everyone in the community, that they would also need micro youth-led campaigns in different communities. So we're really grateful for the support, the one-time support we received through the California Department of Public Health through the Center of Wellness and Nutrition. So from in-person events to outreach campaigns to social media initiatives, we've reached nearly 3 million since 2024. Just a quick snapshot of a few PSAs. My colleague, Mary, is going to show us some brief clips.
The different types of therapy. So therapy, typically when you think of it, is an individual session between you and a mental health professional, but there are other different types of therapy that you can engage in. You can engage in couples therapy, you can engage in family therapy, you can also engage in group therapy. Usually group therapy looks a lot different than the others because you'll have many different people in a room talking about a specific topic. So for example, it could be a grief support group therapy. And same thing with family and couples therapy. It'll just be more than one person. It'll be more than just you and the therapist. It'll be other people in the room.
And in this next slide, it's a Japanese speaking PSA.
スポーツやっててどこかではこうやっぱ喋らずにとにかく努力して結果でこう自分をアピールするっていう考え方は自分の中ではもちろんある。そこをほんじゃどこまでの自分を塞いでプッシュするのかっていう限度っていうことをやっぱちょっと大人になって考えるようにはなりましたね。
You know, that was Olympian Sakura Kokumai, and I just wanted to lift up the importance of multilingual outreach and engagement. And so one of the reasons we did PSAs in multiple languages and also had some focused PSAs for youth and young adults is just we know our community has a lot of intergenerational dynamics. And in this next slide is a link that you'll kind of get later on about the podcasts that we have. That's all led by youth and young adults, just because we know that the longer form conversations are something that are really helpful to capturing mental health. In the next few slides, I'm going to briefly talk a little bit about the Youth Ambassadors Program, which has been funded by CDPH. In calendar year 2025, we had 25 youth complete a 10-week hybrid program. And our post-surveys really showed that there was a reduction in stigma, and also ambassadors left with a stronger sense of community. A key pearl kind of connecting it to positive youth development is really making sure that youth and young adults take a leadership role in their engagement. And so this next slide kind of features some of the final projects ranging from a sports day, a performance at an intergenerational event, and many, many more. And in this next slide, you'll kind of see that we've been really exploring different ways to and different modalities. So we started a monthly forest bathing program where there's meetups with a licensed forest bather where youth and young adults have a chance to experience the healing and restorative benefits that nature can have in one's mental health. And in this next slide, it kind of just a few pearls also, as well as many of you are engaged in the community and may run community facilities, and it may have connection to sports, but really just lifting up the important role that sports can play around positive youth development. And that research does show that coaches can play a big role in making youth and young adults feel like they matter. A key learning in this next slide is that youth and young adults not having enough supports to transition to adulthood is something that we're going to be exploring in calendar year 2026. And in this next slide, LTSC and OCAPICA are partnering with PHI's Alcohol Research Group and UC Irvine to explore a photo voice project specifically around youth suicide support. To kind of end my section, I wanted to play a video from our annual suicide prevention walk, where 100% of the money raised goes to our QPR and therapy stipend programs that I shared before. And it really highlights how postvention can be prevention. Ripple Effect brings together over 400 community members each June, where we honor the lives of those youth and young adults we've lost to suicide, and also build community with one another. So thank you, Mary, for kind of showing this video now.
This group creates a safe space to honor the thoughts, feelings, and emotions. We hope to provide you the support you need.
Ripple Effect is one of my favorite CT events. Every year, I'm moved to tears with each speaker's vulnerability, and I see myself in the stories of these young men and women who we have lost too soon. For a long time, I kept quiet about my depression and my anxiety because I thought it was my own burden to bear. I used to think that no one wants to hear about my pity party, so I should just keep my head down and power through. But hearing other young adults go through some very similar stories of mental health struggles almost 10 years after my own made me realize that something needed to change. Clearly, I hate public speaking, and I'm usually terrified by it. But if one person in the crowd is influenced to seek help or to reach out to a friend who is struggling because of my story, then it's all worth it. I didn't struggle and suffer for years just to keep all of this to myself. It provided me with an opportunity to help others recognize that it's okay to ask for help, and it's not something to be ashamed of.
This event really brings a strong community together, and we should celebrate those we have lost, those who have survived the deepest depths of their ideations, and we should celebrate ourselves. Not only do you return to Ripple Effect year after year, or attend this event for the first time, but you also contribute to really powerful resources. You have no idea how much you are doing to change lives.
So this next slide is just kind of how I wanted to wrap things up. I wanted to kind of close sharing about Nick's song. Nick was the kind of young person who made people believe in possibility. He was thoughtful, curious, and deeply connected to the world around him. Someone who loved the ocean, who cared about others, and who carried big dreams for his future. He was a son, a brother, a friend, a student, and part of a community that loved him deeply. And like many young people, he was also struggling in ways that were not always visible. Nick died by suicide in 2021. And in the wake of that loss, his family made a choice that has shaped so much of what we see today. What we've seen since then shows us what happened next. A young person in crisis reached out in a moment that could have been their last. And because someone in their life understood the urgency of suicide, shaped in part by Nick's story, they intervened and helped keep that young person safe. Another young person who had struggled with self-harm made a different choice, choosing to live because he saw the impact of Nick's loss on his family. Nick's family has also shared that multiple youth and young adults sought out help because of Nick's story, some for the very first time, others taking steps towards therapy and support they may not have otherwise pursued. People in Nick's community became more open to mental health care. Friends and families became messengers. and more young people began accessing support, including through programs like Shaking Tides. Nick's story is heartbreaking, but is also powerful in what is set in motion, because his family chose to speak, to show up, and to build community in the aftermath of unimaginable loss. Other young people are still here today, and this is the ripple effect. And it reminds us that suicide prevention is not only about what happens before a crisis, it's also about what we do afterwards. Nick's life continues to matter, not only in who he was, but in what his story continues to change. And each of us has a role in making sure that young people feel that way before they ever reach a crisis. So with that, I'm going to turn things back over to the Lotus Project. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Thank you so much, Mary and Peter, for the really informative presentation. I know this is a very difficult and very heavy topic to discuss, but it's a much needed topic for our community to better service the AAAI youth and their families. So now we are going to turn it into the Q&A section. And I encourage everyone to continue posting your question in the Q&A. We are likely not to go over all the questions live today due to time restraints, but we will record or keep track of those questions and try to answer them with written answers and send them out with our follow-up emails after the webinar. So I've seen many questions posted here, and there seems to be a theme emerging about like the intergenerational communication and how to work with both parents and the youth. So I assume I'm addressing the question to both of you, whichever and feel free to add on to each other's answers. The first one is from the audience, and they ask, I'm curious if you have advice for talking to parents who do perceive their children as a burden and struggle to accept their teens when they are not achieving at their best. Though parent is unable to label a stress of their child or reason they appreciate their child, noting they only making the things harder. It is making it hard to support teens in I'm sorry, it just moved. In support teens in challenging their belief that they are a burden. So Mary, do you want to take this one first from a clinician's perspective? And Peter, feel free to add on.
Sure. That is so difficult. I would say a lot of that is probably some parent work, and also possibly a referral out to their own, services of some kind, just because yeah, I see so many cultural context of why their child might be seen as a burden is because of their cultural context of seeing those who don't do their part or are struggling in some way as a burden. And so then that translates to my child is a burden. However, maybe we could separate those two things and understanding, oh, these are my cultural background that's informing me of this. How can I love my child despite, what my culture is informing me of how to view my child? And is there a common ground we could come to work together? Because I see it's impacting the teen as well, on their view of themselves. And that's just so closely tied with the parent work. So it's very hard for me to define based on just that blur, but that's kind of my initial thought is parent work, being able to confront some of the ways they automatically think based on their culture and how that translates to how they view their kid as, worthless or useless or a burden.
I think it also connects to what you talked earlier, like whether we want to involve the parents into this process, right? Whether we want to treat them as one problem or kind of tackle them separately might be more appropriate. And Peter, do you have anything to add on? Okay, so let's move on to the next one that is touch upon the nuances within the Asian American and Asian immigrants communities. And they ask, there's a lot of diversity between communities like Pakistani, Mon, Thai, and Korean, and also within generational differences, gender differences, and regional differences. So how do you balance using insider cultural knowledge to connect with individuals while also stay open to different perspectives in these conversations?
I'll let Mary jump in right after me, but I think one of the important pieces, both on the clinician end, but also the community end, is the real role that community organizations that have experience with these communities and the important role that we play as being bridge builders. And so I just really want to highlight that, for example, one of the big pieces of feedback that we get from the therapy stipend program that we have is a lot of gratitude for having a clinician who really kind of understands the lived experience of that the young person that is reaching out for help for them. So I think there's a lot of richness to that, but I think Mary Lou might also have other pearls to share.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think also this is very similar to just being culturally informed in general. There's so many nuances to culture. So curiosity is always something to be noted, and never coming in with the assumption that you know everything about your client. Even within Asian culture and even within, let's say, Korean culture, I've seen clients who, are Korean, Christian background, like everything very similar to my own, and yet totally different cultural experience. So I would pull from the strengths of my own background to support, but I would never use it as a hindrance of labeling that person to fall under all of those same cultural things that I experienced. I would want to say, oh, that's curious. Let me learn more about how that person experienced that thing. And I think that ties in the same way to the other diversity and the other differences as well. There are some, I believe some Japanese culture, like the parent is very Americanized more so and have a lot of those similar background and cultural differences of like an American viewpoint versus like in a Vietnamese culture, for example, very traditional Eastern mindset for the parent versus the child. So varies, I suppose. That would be my answer.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. I like you highlighting the importance of being curious and using the cultural knowledge as a strength, but not as a presumption coming into the relationship. And then we have another question. It's more specific. Mary asked, are there specific therapeutic practices or models AA and HPI therapists have found helpful with addressing suicidal ideation or suicide prevention with our communities?
Yeah, I would say in our work, we kind of balance between utilizing solution-focused type of practices, because there are an aspect of AA and HPI that want a solution right away. However, we don't always give that because we know that sometimes it's not a one and done. Like we don't just magically wave a wand and the suicide ideation goes away. So there are more longer term therapy models. EMDR is one that we use. So we do have a client who we did some EMDR work and empty chair work with them in order to separate the client's like, you have to do this, I have to do this. We were able to ask them, is that in your voice? And it discovered that it was in the parent's voice, but had internalized into their own voice. So that's like kind of an example of further work you can do with different modalities. Yeah, I'm not too sure if there's any specific ones that I would recommend over others at the moment.
And Peter, do you have anything to add on? I know you mentioned QPR in your presentation. I guess my curious is adding on to that question, and I wonder if you guys use any adaptation to certain evidence practices, and if so, what do you think in your experience are the most important adaptations linguistically or culturally to do to working with Asian AAAI communities?
Yeah, maybe to build what Mary said was, I think what's really great about having people with lived experience in the community kind of be the delivery of doing the delivery of some of the trainings and other presentations and materials is that people are able to kind of add, and people know the cultural context, and so they kind of keep that in mind in the preparation. They're able to build scenarios and situations that may feel a little bit more familiar to folks in the training than other trainings. And so I think part of it is just really adaptation and really kind of knowing your audience. And, I really also want to lift up what Mary said too, is that you don't have to be a member of that specific community in order to work well with the community. But, similar to some of the other questions later, is there has to be some cultural humility, being curious and being open and just wanting to learn. And I think at the end of the day, that those active listening skills, whether you're a clinician or non-clinician, are probably the most important ingredients in order to really hearing where people are from.
Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, I also wanted to just touch on the question you had. There are cultural adaptation is kind of understanding that people in AAI culture, they typically go toward people that look like them, just from that collectivist mindset, right? So, for example, I was looking for an Asian, right, doctor, right, or a Korean doctor very specifically, and there's nothing against others who don't look like that, but there's like a comfort level tied to that piece. So I think even in outreach, having people who look more like the people you're outreaching to can access services better because they're like, oh, you look like me. I can go and access services at a place where someone speaks my language, is able to understand my background. So that's one really big cultural adaptation that we've used.
Yeah. So the next one question is, how can you support parents in believing their kids are having SI if they don't? I guess this is a very specific question, again, about intergenerational communication.
Yeah. That's a really hard one and something we encounter a lot because of stigma and biases. So it's us doing some of that education work, building more trust with the parents so that they understand we're coming from a good place. And I also utilize this line. It might be a little kind of, I don't know. Let me say it and then we'll see how we feel about it. But I kind of always use thank you for coming in for services. Thank you for prioritizing help for your child. This could be a way to help your child feel more seen and understood. How can we do that together? What are some barriers that are preventing you from believing that this is true for them? And, let's look at those barriers and work on them. So I'm using a method of helping them feel like a bigger part of the process of the treatment, always assuming that they want the best, even though they're showing they're not, right? They're showing this, I don't believe my kid. I don't believe that they are suicidal. Still coming in with respect and understanding. And then that usually helps lower the defensiveness to get them to a point of being like, oh, even if it's not true, if it were true, what could I do to help them? Yeah, so that's an example.
Yeah, I really love what Mary said. And I think one of the key pieces that it's a key ingredient is just because we know that there's really low help-seeking behaviors in our community. So the fact that this parent expressed this, we really kind of should celebrate that and use this as a gateway. I think, it all comes with some trusting relationships and knowing that there might be something else going on that the parent's concerned about. So I think, whether you're a clinician or a non-clinician, I'm just kind of, again, going in with some curiosity to learn more. I think it's a really helpful place to kind of, and it's why it's great that this parent actually said something out loud because they're verbalizing it, which should really kind of be celebrated.
Yeah. So thank you, Peter and Mary. I know we still have questions unanswered. They're all really great questions, and we'll try to answer them with written answers and share it with the community. So thank you again for being here. We want to be respectful for everyone's time, and we will end the webinar here. And also, I'm handing it back to Alan for any final logistics. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary and Peter, for joining us again as speakers and sharing everything that you know about suicide prevention for AAAI communities and youth. Also, thank you, Keye, for moderating this session. And I wanted to share, like Keye said, if you all have more questions as well, we will be sharing like certain contact information afterwards so that you all can reach out and get your questions answered. And we'll also be going through some of those leftover Q&A questions. And in terms of like this webinar series, we will be hosting our third and final webinar in the suicide prevention series sometime in May. And that webinar will be focused on caring for AAAI families and youth that have been impacted by suicide and some of that post-vention piece that Peter mentioned in his presentation. So look out for more updates about that and registration information that we'll send out about it in the future. And we've posted the webinar evaluation form in the chat. So if you all have time, please please take time to fill it out and give us some feedback about the presentation and about the webinar. And for CE credits again, for those that didn't hear in the beginning, if you didn't mark that you needed CE credits in the registration, but you are hoping to get them, then email us at lotusproject@phi.org and we can get them to you within the next month. And then the recording of the webinar and along with speaker slides, contact information, link to the evaluation form, and other resources that were brought up in this webinar and outside of it as well, we will share with you all within the next week. So look out for that email. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us today.